Rhetorical criticism focuses on the use of rhetoric in the text. I would imagine that your initial reaction to that statement is negative. Indeed, in our modern usage, we tend to think of rhetoric as being something akin to propaganda. Clifton Black, writing an article on rhetorical criticism in Joe Green's book, Hearing the New Testament, calls this a cheap connotation of rhetoric. Like all stereotypes, it is generalized. The truth is that we all employ rhetoric every single day. It's a normal tool of communication. Anytime that you attempt to persuade someone to do something, you're employing rhetoric. Rhetoric is nothing less than persuasive communication. It's aimed at generating a desired response. For instance, the ladies of our church have been selling homemade pies in order to help put a new tile floor in our fellowship hall. If one of them approached you about buying a pie, knowing that you may be predisposed to help a church of like precious faith, they may inform you that the proceeds from the pie sales are going towards a new floor in the fellowship hall. That tidbit of information is not just a news bulletin. It's more than just information. It is intended to arouse emotions and help persuade you to purchase the pies. The purchase of the pies is now about much more than just your sweet tooth. It's now linked to a cause that you may be sympathetic towards. The lady employing that tactic might not even recognize it as rhetoric, but that is exactly what it is. It is a calculated effort to enhance her sales pitch. It's a communication tool designed to evoke your emotions. David De Silva, in his introduction to the New Testament, says that persuasion requires three components. First, the hearers have to know and trust the speaker. In our example of selling pies, it's critical that you know that the lady who is selling you the pies is of the same faith as you. She's trustworthy. Secondly, the persuasion has to use some form of rational proof. You should buy these pies because they will benefit our church. We need a new floor in the fellowship hall. Finally, the persuasion has to evoke emotion, putting the hearer into a frame of mind that is conducive to the action desired. If you're not sympathetic to our effort to install a new floor in the fellowship hall, then the rhetoric will not be successful at all. But if your emotions can be tugged at, and you can maybe even be made to feel obligated to help out, then the rhetoric will succeed. Rhetorical criticism presents us with a multifaceted method of approaching the text. Clifton Black details three main manifestations of the method and calls it, quote, a three-legged stool on which many different critics may sit, with each applying more weight to one leg than to the others, end quote. He says that the first approach, pioneered by James Muhlenberg, is focused on the structure and style of the biblical text. In the way that I understand it, it is kind of a text-oriented approach to rhetorical criticism. The second approach is pioneered by George Kennedy, and it focuses on the intent and technique of the rhetoric employed. It's more of what I would see as an author-oriented approach to rhetorical criticism. The final approach was pioneered by Chaim Perelman. Forgive me if I got the name wrong, but I gave it the old college try. It focuses on the response of the audience to the rhetoric, and it's a reader-oriented approach. When Green gives an example of rhetorical criticism, he presents three different views of the text using the three different methods. However, he goes on to say that none of the methods is superior to the others, and that each has their place. He suggests that rhetorical criticism should employ any or all of the methods in the way that best suits the interpreter. With that in mind, we are going to look at a sample text and attempt to use this synthesized approach to the text in order to gain some insight through rhetorical criticism. I've chosen Paul's letter to Philemon from which to draw this example. While rhetoric is displayed in all of Paul's letters, this particular letter may be the most overtly rhetorical of them all. It is, after all, a letter written to persuade Philemon to take a particular course of action. What is so interesting about Philemon is that Paul obviously has the upper hand in this relationship. And if he so desired, he could pretty much demand that Philemon do what it is that Paul wants him to do. Instead, Paul employs the conventions of rhetoric to persuade Philemon. What is so interesting about Philemon is that Paul obviously has the upper hand in this relationship. And if he so desired, he could pretty much demand that Philemon do what it is that Paul wants him to do. Instead, Paul employs the conventions of rhetoric to persuade Philemon to act in the way that Paul wants him to act. The entire letter is about evoking a specific emotional response that leads to a desired action. To assist me in the rhetorical analysis of this text, I turn to Ben Witherington III's Socio-Rhetorical Commentary series. I found this series to be quite informative over the years, though D.A. Carson, in his New Testament survey of commentaries, seems to see it more as a middle-of-the-road commentary. While there are no direct quotes from Witherington in this presentation, my thought process was influenced by his analysis. Likewise, I have recently started reading N.T. Wright's 2-volume work on Paul and the faithfulness of God. Once again, I have not directly quoted Wright. In fact, I haven't even specifically reviewed his comments before writing this or preparing this presentation. But his first chapter focuses on Paul and Philemon and likely helped color my thought process as well. While it would be interesting to look at the entire letter and watch how the request unfolds in the letter, it is best, in the interest of brevity, for us to focus on a single verse. Before introducing the text, though, let me set the stage. Philemon is a convert of Paul's. In an important sense, Paul is his father in the gospel. And inasmuch as there is a leader-follower dynamic at work, Paul is the leader and Philemon is the follower. The other actor in this drama is a runaway slave named Onesimus. His name means useful, and Paul, in the course of the letter, makes a play on that name in a couple of different passages. The important thing to know about Onesimus is that he wasn't very useful to Philemon because he ran away. And judging from the contents of the letter, he likely stole some valuables from Philemon in order to finance his escape. However, Onesimus has met Paul in prison and has now become a convert. Now the slave who was useless to his master has become useful to Paul. The occasion for the letter is that Paul is sending Onesimus back to Philemon. The slave who left as a worthless, rebellious servant now returns as a brother in the Lord. And while Paul never explicitly asks Philemon to release Onesimus from bonds of slavery, the letter is designed to persuade Philemon to reach that conclusion on his own. I've selected Philemon 17 because I believe it is the pivotal climax of Paul's rhetorical argument. It would be impossible to boil the whole letter down to a single verse, but if you were to attempt it, this would be that verse. It reads this way, Philemon 17. If thou count me therefore a partner, receive him as myself. As Paul prepares to make his pivotal request in the letter that Philemon would receive Onesimus as a brother in the Lord, Paul first evokes a sense of partnership between Philemon and Paul. If thou count me, therefore, a partner. This is an important move by Paul because he is clearly the leader, the apostle, Philemon's father in the gospel. But he approaches Philemon not from a superior position, but as an equal. The unspoken message here is that when it comes to the fellowship of the cross, all lines of distinction fade away. There is no big me and little you. J.T. Pugh used to say it this way: the ground is level at the foot of the cross. We all stand at the same level. And the first thing that Paul does in this verse is level the ground between him and Philemon. After having accomplished that, he makes his audacious request to Philemon: receive Onesimus as you would receive me. Capitalizing on the emotions evoked by the previous statement, Paul challenges Philemon to do the same for Onesimus as Paul has just done for him. Just as Paul has refused to recognize the upper hand that is clearly his and has viewed Philemon as an equal, he now challenges Philemon, the slave owner, to treat his rebellious runaway slave in the same way. Treat him like you would treat me implies that Onesimus is also a partner with Philemon and Paul in the gospel. The implications of this are significant. Philemon has the legal grounds to punish Onesimus severely, perhaps even to have him crucified. It would be an act of mercy if he simply received him back into his household and let him assume his old position as if nothing had ever happened. That would be a difficult enough request. But Paul's request extends far beyond that. He challenges Philemon to treat Onesimus as a brother in the Lord, as a partner in the cause of Christ, as no less than Paul himself. I know it's not explicitly stated in the text, but Paul is telling Philemon to treat Onesimus in the same way that the Lord has treated him. No doubt Philemon has been forgiven of much. Now Paul beseeches him to show the same kind of mercy to Onesimus as he has received. The point here is to demonstrate a rhetorical device. Paul first evokes the emotional partnership with Philemon, then employs that to cause Philemon to feel the necessity of treating Onesimus in the same manner. The dictionary of Paul and his letters contains an entry on rhetorical criticism that clearly identifies the pros and cons of this method. It starts by acknowledging that this method helps the reader to, quote, engage in a detailed analysis of the structures and techniques of argumentation employed by Paul, end quote. It goes on to say, however, quote, if such analysis leads to a preoccupation with form over substance, then rhetorical criticism may be an obstacle to understanding the meaning of Paul's letters, end quote. The danger lies in becoming so preoccupied with the various rhetorical devices being used that you miss the larger meaning of the text. The article goes on to say, quote, if the goal is clear exposition of what Paul meant by his arguments, then this methodology may be helpful by clarifying how Paul developed his arguments, end quote. To paraphrase De Silva, this has a pastoral benefit because it demonstrates for us the means and methods by which we may evoke similar responses from those that we lead in situations and circumstances that come up in our congregations. It shows us the right approach. I'm certain that there is much more that could be said about rhetorical criticism. But to sum things up, it focuses on the persuasive nature of the text, either from a text-centric viewpoint, an author-centric viewpoint, or a response or reader-centric viewpoint. The strongest analysis, however, will recognize the significance of all three viewpoints. Paul intended to cause Philemon to act. The text was designed to evoke an emotional response from Philemon. And the response by Philemon, we can only guess at. But if it were me, I know how I would respond. When Paul said, treat him as you would treat me, I would see it very clearly that I needed to accept and receive Onesimus back into the fold as a brother in the Lord. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have had a great time this semester. This has been a very informative class, and I look forward to having another class with all of you in the future. God bless you.